To me, it's a way to make the violence more mental, more, not about the reality of the violence, but about the symbol of the violence. That's why I love, in South Korean cinema, you have this kind of humor which allows you to go for the ride and to think about the topics, but without being assaulted by it.
I said, tell Miss Laura goodbye.
Bye, Miss Laura.
You can have a distance because, you have some way to cope with it and take it out and also laugh. And to me, satire is such a powerful weapon, to address issues. And that also very much what I love to do is to use the humor as a weapon to kind of criticize, things that I see around me. And basically for me, it's not to traumatize people, but to use the violence as a symbol of reflection, a symbol of thinking, a symbol of analyzing, but in a way that's not going to be, assaulting you, basically.
Have you tried The Substance? In this video, I'm going to be breaking down all my thoughts on this brilliantly bold new film. I'm going to pay close attention to the stylistic choices and filmmaking techniques that director Coralie Fargeat prioritizes. I'll also be discussing my overall thoughts on the film and asking the question, how much substance is too much substance? This will be a full spoiler-filled discussion, so you have been warned. But before we jump into this video, I wanted to say that this is how close I am to monetization. I'm this close.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
I'd really appreciate your support in helping me close this gap, and the best way to do so is to subscribe and by leaving a like on the video. Okay, everyone ready? Let's get into it.
The Substance.
Right from the beginning, the film makes a lot of its stylistic choices very clear. Films can be tackled in many ways. In the case of, say, a Noah Baumbach film, the dialogue is extensive and heavily rooted within the character's backstory.
You are going to meet a lot of interesting new people. I didn't make it a month at college because I like drugs so much.
In the case of The Substance, the script was 150 pages, and only 20 of those pages amounted to actual dialogue. This is therefore a story that's deeply visually driven. Rather than prioritise the character's development, this is a film that cares more about evoking feeling. The result of this means that the characters are reduced to their personalities, but that works to the film's advantage if the aim is to make a satire. This is a heightened reality, where the specific way in which a character feels is more relevant than why they feel that way. To help strike this tone, the film has a sharply considered sense of colour palette. Elisabeth wears a bright yellow jacket and walks along saturated red corridors, clearly plucked out of a Stanley Kubrick film. I suppose the idea is that by overemphasizing the glossy colours of Hollywood, we're also highlighting its intense nature. The cinematography utilizes extreme wide-angle lenses. Bringing a wide-angle lens close to a character makes us feel uneasy as we're examining both the character and the world around them. This sense of paranoia is why wide-angle lenses have been a staple of the horror genre. Our gaze is forced to explore the full width of the frame. For The Substance, cinematographer Benjamin Kraken initially considered anamorphic lenses which stretched the frame, creating a glossy look whilst also allowing for distorted images. This is something that might make sense for the story. Instead, they opted for spherical lenses because Coralie cared about the precision of her images, which could be disturbed by distortion. This is particularly essential for all the close-ups on prosthetics where the detail of the body horror matters. Additionally, the filmmakers utilised diopters. Diopters are an additional piece of glass you attach to your lens that can shift the central focus point even closer to the camera. You may have heard of a split diopter, in which half the glass is a diopter and the other half is clear, so you only have half the frame being pulled closer. This was also used in The Substance. Diopters are a powerful tool to make something feel hyperbolic. You have the intensity of something in front of you, whilst also feeling the open space around you. So with this approach, you can effectively focus up to the glass itself. Now let's consider how Coralie Fargeat utilises this toolkit. Early on in the movie, there's a few scenes that feature Dennis Quaid's character. Dennis Quaid is playing an over-the-top misogynistic Hollywood producer called Harvey.
What a gorgeous little angel.
Near the beginning of the film, we see a moment where Harvey enters a toilet whilst on a phone call. He is shouting about replacing Elisabeth with a younger actress. Unbeknownst to him, of course, is that Elisabeth is sat within one of the stalls. This is a very classic scene I've seen in a few Hollywood movies where we might typically see the camera placed in the stall with our protagonist, so we can experience the moment with her. Rather than doing this, Coralie Fargeat chooses to place the camera on top of the urinal and not move it throughout the entire scene. The result is that whilst Harvey is on his phone call, he's effectively urinating on the audience. As Harvey leaves, we see a shy Elisabeth exit her stall in the background. This is essentially the technique the film deploys throughout, where you don't just listen about a narrative, but you are also made to intensely feel a moment at the same time. A scene like this is so memorable because it takes a familiar narrative and finds an intensely provocative way of approaching it. I find it interesting that with these lenses and production design, Coralie doesn't have to move the camera to make her point. Additionally, she only has 2 characters here, but is still able to utilise the depth of the frame to showcase power. When I saw The Substance, I was quite stunned by the pacing.
You're hired.
As a filmmaker, the challenges you usually face is one of both time and budget. Consequently, not every scene you want to shoot can get the attention it deserves. You have to pick your battles about where you want to pay the most attention. The risk of not doing this is that you end up pushing your crew into overtime, which makes producers upset because you're burning unbudgeted money, and it makes crew members upset because they want to go home and see their families. I'm a filmmaker, and I've also worked on high-budgeted productions, so I've gained a knack for understanding this. The montage sequence of Sue's first on-air appearance, to my mind, would take 3 days at least to shoot, bearing in mind that the amount of setups we're seeing are just the ones that made the cut. So my first thought here was, how the hell did Coralie manage to shoot this much footage? It turns out that the need for extensive shooting is something that Coralie foresaw ahead of production. She therefore came up with an interesting strategy. The production schedule for The Substance was split into multiple shooting blocks, so for the initial block of shooting, she'd work with her lead cast, but then return later on to recreate the scenes with body doubles. This is how she was able to gather all those close-ups and cutaways and shots of extras needed to make the numerous montages throughout the film. These additional shooting days were extensive, and they'd have to rebuild sections of the set for those days. Additionally, there was no second unit director working simultaneously with the main shoot. Instead, Coralie opted to direct everything herself over a longer period of time in order to establish a cohesive edit. And as for the stuff you can't fake, like the first injection Elisabeth takes, well, that's Coralie's arm taking a real injection. She wanted it to be real because she could tell if it was fake, so she was willing to take the substance herself. We now understand how Coralie has enough material to make a rapid and considered edit. In addition, she deploys 2 key techniques in her story structure to help emphasize the tone: repetition and juxtaposition. Throughout the film, we see the lives of 2 protagonists, or should I say the same protagonist. I love how their scenes are juxtaposed and contrasted. When Sue walks down the street, the tracking shot is smoothly gliding along whilst we look up at her. Coralie is also clearly playing with perspective and utilising the male gaze on purpose, not to deliberately be alluring, but rather satirical. The way that is achieved is again through overstimulating the image with glossy bright colours, with the saturation dialed slightly too far up. These sequences are juxtaposed with Elisabeth walking down the same street, but with each switch comes a shakier camera operating. I found it funny that by the time Elisabeth is an old hunchback, it feels like the camera is being thrown about as we follow her running down the street. Repeating moments like this and playing with the different ways acts as a keystone that punctuates the film. The way they differ therefore stands out to us. All of this together helps define the tone as the film progresses. I love the repetition of specific cutaways like the palm trees that ominously look down at us. Repetition and juxtaposition of scenes like this are great, and it's something I've certainly seen before in cinema. I'm reminded of Martin Scorsese's Casino, in which the extravagant excess of the casino floor is juxtaposed with the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert. Given that The Substance is a story about an unhealthy balance, is it possible to find a healthy balance in its own repetition? I said this in my Saltburn review as well. I like to not have reminder flashback scenes. I'm an audience member who enjoys not being reminded of things for context's sake. I don't like to have my hand held by the filmmakers. Now the interesting thing here is I'm not sure you can exactly apply that criticism to this film. Let me explain. There's a moment where Elisabeth goes to find the phone number of her old friend, and we see a faded flashback of him saying,
"You're still the most beautiful girl in the whole wide world."
We then see her go for the leaving gift that Harvey gave her, and again we see that faded flashback of him giving her that gift. Here's the thing though, the way that those bits were done made me think that Coralie is aware of her audience's intelligence. She knows we don't need reminding of those bits. The pacing is in rapid succession. Rather than cutting back to those scenes, she plays them in faded circles like a classic Hollywood movie transition, something you might see in a fairy tale ending. I should also add that the performances are extremely zealous, so overall I think that Coralie knows we remember those moments, but deliberately plays these scenes rapidly in this way to create a sarcastic tone. This is exactly the whiplash of feeling that Elisabeth feels while she's alone in her apartment. I have to say that to see a filmmaker understand her audience and manipulate a satirical tone like this is very clever. I think the substance is filled with scenes and sequences where she's continuing to hang a lantern or be one step ahead of our expectations. This in turn strikes a tone that also connects with the character. That to me is great filmmaking. So what I have just gone through is essentially the paradox I feel as an audience member. I started with a criticism and I ended with a compliment. As if the film itself has split my brain in two. I can criticise this film, but I totally see that Coralie Fargeat is a confident filmmaker who already knows some of the criticisms you can have and is embracing it anyway. The choices she makes are a type of indulgence where we do get something out of it. Perhaps we would never get those things otherwise. So it's really up to how we prefer it. Is it worth it? Are the choices good or bad? Well, in the time since I've seen the film, I do think it's a fun, absurd ride. And also that Coralie does indeed hide bad choices by hanging a lantern, or just via an extreme conviction to those moments. For example, I think that the scene where Elisabeth and Sue fight each other is incredibly nasty and abhorrent to watch. Sue smashes Elisabeth's face into a mirror repeatedly, and as an audience member I'm watching this going, yes, I understand your metaphor, you can stop now, but the scene relents and continues on and on past where you think it would end. This is a good summation of the movie itself. The hyperfixation of scenes that montage 100 shots together is astonishing and helps emphasize the intensity of hungry Hollywood, but it also makes this film feel really laboured. I thought that the natural ending to this film would occur when Sue and Elisabeth confront each other, but no, there's a whole other section with significant runtime. On the other hand, your expectations are being subverted, which is engaging, but also you're like, where is this film going? The humour and ludicrous nature of the final few scenes keeps you on your toes as well, so you're sort of locked into this rollercoaster ride of expectation meeting reality. I do think that the number of dream scenes and flashbacks goes beyond satire. After a while, we don't necessarily learn or feel a lot that's new. I understand that this is about feeling, and the experience of this repetition is the means of emphasizing feeling, but eventually I think we start getting diminishing returns. Though I will say that in retrospect, I find it quite amusing that the monster character has an anxiety dream scene just like Elisabeth and Sue. The monster is also worried about upsetting people on stage. I find that interesting because the thing that connects all three versions of the character is a desperate sense of dreading anxiety. In a way, this specific feeling transcends all versions and is the defining characteristic of their humanity. It's the only psychologically human part to the monster character. Her dream of being on stage was pretty bad, but then her reality was way worse. Oh my god, it's the Carrie prom scene times a million. And yes, it goes on and on and on, way past the point where you think it would end. Overall, I am interested by the dichotomy between Elisabeth and Sue. The analogy does work for me. Elisabeth is slowly becoming a personification of both her sacrifice as well as the elderly age she's trying to hide. She's of course like that creature behind the wall in David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. Sue is a personification of what Elisabeth believes to be her best parts. There's something quite heartbreaking about how Elisabeth can't terminate Sue. She came from her like her child and exists as an embodiment of Elisabeth's ideas of perfection. I do wonder though that with the visual examination of this relationship, without too many side characters or dialogue, we ended up with too much substance. What do you think? I'd really love to know how people feel about this film, so please leave a comment below. I read all the comments and I try to respond to as many as I can. So let's continue this conversation. And as mentioned up top, please do press these buttons. It would really help me out. I genuinely appreciate it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.